A 5-year-old housekeeper's daughter whispered one sentence that froze a billionaire in his tracks, and uncovered a betrayal no one else dared to notice. The offices of Milton and Hart felt unusually still that afternoon, as though the entire building were holding its breath between board meetings and late-day deadlines. Most employees had retreated to conference rooms or quiet corners, their voices a faint hum behind closed doors, and the glossy floors of the executive level gleamed under the soft white lights. In the middle of that polished silence sat 5-year-old Lily Harper, her legs dangling from a chair far too tall for her and her small hands clutching the hem of her red dress. She wasn't supposed to be there. Children didn't belong in a corporate skyscraper full of lawyers, CEOs, and financial strategists. But her babysitter had fallen ill that morning, and her mother, Sarah, who worked as a janitor on the evening shift, had begged her supervisor to allow Lily to stay quietly in a corner until her tasks were done. Lily had promised to sit still, promised not to touch anything, promised to be invisible. But sitting quietly was difficult when everything around her felt enormous and important. The walls were covered in framed awards and photographs of smiling executives shaking hands. The floor was so shiny she could see her own reflection, and she watched the light bounce from her golden hair as she swung her feet, pretending the floor was a pond and her shoes were tapping little ripples into it. She was beginning to grow bored when footsteps echoed through the corridor, 2 sets, hurried and sharp, accompanied by hushed whispers. Lily glanced up without moving her head too much, pretending she was still invisible. 2 men in crisp shirts and expensive shoes rounded the corner, and one of them clutched a folder marked with a bright red stripe. She didn't know what the stripe meant, but something about the way they acted, their glances over their shoulders, the tension in their movements, made her sit up straighter. "Come on," the taller one muttered. "He'll be upstairs any minute." "I told you, he's stuck in a meeting," the other said, though he sounded far more nervous than reassured. "We just switch the contract and walk away. He'll sign it without thinking twice." Lily blinked and leaned slightly forward, still unnoticed. The first man opened the red-striped folder, scanned the pages quickly, and slipped them out. The second man passed him a thick stack of gray documents, which he inserted instead. They worked with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment and the anxiety of someone who knew exactly how dangerous it was. The taller man closed the folder again, exhaling shakily. "Done. Let's go." Lily's heart thumped in her chest, not because she fully understood what was happening, but because she could feel that it wasn't supposed to happen at all. The men rushed past her without even glancing in her direction. They didn't see the little girl sitting as still as a statue, watching them with wide blue eyes. They didn't imagine that anyone as small and quiet as she was could matter. Lily stared down the hallway where they disappeared, her fingers curling around the fabric of her dress. She didn't know what was in the folders or why they mattered, but she remembered her mother's words from the night before, whispered while folding laundry: "Important people make important decisions. One wrong paper can change everything." And now, Lily realized she had just seen someone change the papers on purpose. A soft chime echoed from the elevator at the far end of the hall. Lily turned her head just as the doors slid open and a tall man stepped out, carrying an air of authority that seemed to pull the room into alignment around him. He wore an impeccably tailored navy suit that matched his serious expression, his brown hair brushed neatly back, and his blue eyes focused and intense. She had seen a picture of him once on one of the framed posters near the lobby. His name was Garrett Milton, the billionaire who owned the company. Lily's legs went still. Her breath caught. She felt as though she had stumbled upon something she wasn't supposed to see, something she didn't know how to explain. Garrett strode forward, scrolling through messages on his phone, but then he paused mid-step. A tiny sound had reached him, a shaky exhale, a stifled breath, something small but wrong in the silence of the hallway. He looked up and spotted her immediately. A child. Alone. In a red dress. And by the expression on her face, something had frightened her. He slipped his phone into his pocket and approached her with deliberate calm. "Are you all right?" he asked, lowering his voice as he reached her chair. Lily swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the seat. Her lips trembled for a moment before she whispered, almost inaudibly, "I saw them switch the folder." Garrett froze, the air in the hallway shifting around them. He bent down slightly, enough to meet her eyes. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice calmer but sharper now. Lily pointed to the corridor the men had disappeared down. Her voice was trembling but certain as she repeated, "They changed the papers in the red folder. They said, you wouldn't notice." And with those quiet words, the entire direction of the day, and of their lives, began to turn. Garrett stayed completely still for a moment, not out of disbelief, but because he understood instantly how severe the implications of her words were. A 5-year-old wouldn't invent details about folders and documents. Children didn't lie with that kind of precision, adults did. He lowered himself to one knee so he could look directly into her wide blue eyes and saw that what rattled her wasn't confusion, it was the instinctive fear of a child who had witnessed something she sensed was wrong, even if she didn't understand why. He forced his voice to stay gentle, though behind it his mind had already begun to race. "Lily," he said slowly, "can you tell me exactly what you saw them do?" She bit her lip, her small fingers twisting the ribbon on her dress as she searched for the right words. She looked left and right first, as if making sure the men hadn't returned. "They had a red folder," she said finally. "With a stripe on it. They opened it and took the papers out. Then they put different papers in, gray ones. And they said you wouldn't find out." Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. Garrett exhaled, not because he doubted her, but because the seriousness of the situation landed fully on his shoulders. That red-striped folder was no ordinary file. It held the contract for an international merger valued at nearly $8 billion, a contract he was scheduled to sign within the next hour. Any change in the document could sabotage negotiations, alter legal commitments, or expose the company to catastrophic liabilities. And 2 employees had just tampered with it within the walls of his own building. He stood up abruptly, the shift in his posture causing Lily to flinch as if she had done something wrong. That reaction pierced him unexpectedly. He softened his expression immediately and knelt back down. "You did the right thing by telling me," he said firmly. "I'm not angry with you. I'm grateful." She blinked at him, surprised by the reassurance. "Can you stay with me for a little while?" he asked. "Just until your mom comes back." Lily nodded quickly, relieved to be given instructions she could understand. Garrett extended his hand, not to force her to take it but to give her something steady to hold on to if she wanted it. After a brief hesitation, she placed her tiny hand in his, trusting him in the simple, instinctive way only children could. He led her toward his office, his steps purposeful and controlled despite the storm building inside him. He wasn't just a CEO now, he was a man chasing the truth hidden behind a child's trembling voice. When they entered his office, he guided her to the leather chair beside his desk. It was enormous compared to her, and she sat on the edge with her feet dangling, looking both nervous and strangely proud that someone so important had asked for her help. Garrett pressed a button on the intercom. His tone was calm but carried an undertone that made the receptionist on the other end straighten instantly. "Send security to my office," he said. "And find Sarah Harper. Tell her to come immediately." "Yes, sir. Right away." He turned back to Lily, who was watching him with the quiet attentiveness of a child who had been taught early in life to observe adults carefully. Are you in trouble?" she asked in a tiny voice, worried she had caused something terrible. "No," he said gently. "I am not in trouble. And neither are you. But the men who changed that folder might be." She hugged herself, absorbing his words. Moments later, there was a knock at the door. 2 security officers stepped inside, and behind them appeared Sarah Harper, still wearing her cleaning uniform, her face flushed with fear and confusion. She hurried toward her daughter and knelt beside her, brushing her hair back with trembling hands. "What happened?" "Lily, are you okay?" she asked frantically. Garrett closed the office door and approached them with a seriousness that made Sarah straighten in instinctive respect. "Your daughter witnessed a document tampering incident," he said evenly. "Her information may have prevented a major breach." Sarah's mouth fell open. She did what?" "Oh God, Lily, did you wander into someone's office?" "Did you?" "No," Garrett cut in calmly. "She didn't do anything wrong. In fact, she may have saved this entire company a disaster." Lily leaned into her mother's side, still unsure whether to feel proud or scared. Sarah looked at Garrett, overwhelmed, not knowing what to say. "What she told me was clear and detailed," he continued. "I need to review the surveillance footage immediately. If what she saw is correct, my company has been targeted from the inside." Sarah swallowed hard, glancing down at her little girl, who stared back with the solemn honesty only a child could carry. Garrett turned to the head of security. "Pull the camera feeds for the 11th floor east hallway for the last 90 minutes. Bring any footage showing employees carrying red-striped folders." The officer nodded sharply and left at once. As the office fell quiet again, Sarah wrapped an arm protectively around Lily, as though shielding her from a world far bigger and darker than she had ever intended her daughter to be part of. Garrett walked to his desk and rested both hands on its surface, head lowered for a moment. Lily watched him with wide eyes. "Did I help?" she whispered from across the room. Garrett lifted his head slowly. In his expression there was no doubt, no uncertainty, only respect. "You didn't just help," he said. "You might have just saved everything." Lily's eyes widened in surprise, and something small but bright flickered inside her, the realization that even someone tiny could tip the balance of giants. And Garrett, looking at her, realized something too: truth sometimes came from the smallest voice in the quietest moment. And he had almost missed it. Security footage arrived faster than Garrett expected, as though the entire building sensed the gravity of the moment and moved with synchronized urgency. The head of security returned carrying a tablet and several printed still frames, his posture stiff and alert. He motioned for Garrett to come closer, but Garrett shook his head and walked toward Lily and Sarah instead, choosing to show them that this was not something happening around them but something they were actively part of. It felt important for Lily to understand that her bravery wasn't being swept aside as a childish accident. The officer placed the tablet on Garrett's desk and began playing the footage. The screen showed an empty hallway at first, then the two men entering from the elevator, glancing around before approaching a cabinet where sensitive documents were stored. Lily tensed at the sight, her small hand tightening around her mother's. Sarah instinctively wrapped her arms around her daughter, both protective and fearful of where this was leading. As the camera angle shifted, Garrett recognized the men, Marcus Hale and Dylan Reeves, mid-level financial analysts with spotless performance reviews and access to more information than they should have had. They looked calm, almost rehearsed, as Marcus opened the cabinet and pulled out the red-striped folder. Dylan kept watch while Marcus removed the real contract and replaced it with the forged gray paper bundle. "Pause there," Garrett said quietly. The officer froze the frame. The screen showed Marcus sealing the folder with practiced casualness, while Dylan kept glancing down the hallway with growing nerves. It wasn't the clumsy act of inexperienced saboteurs, it was precise, calculated, and fast. "That's exactly what I saw," Lily said, her voice small but certain. Garrett nodded slowly, not to her but to himself, acknowledging the truth that had been too easy to overlook simply because it came from someone barely tall enough to reach a doorknob. He turned to the security officer. "I want both men detained immediately. Notify legal. They knowingly tampered with confidential material. Full investigation, no exceptions." The officer nodded and left quickly. As the door closed, silence settled over the office, but it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, tense, charged with the realization of what could have happened if a 5-year-old had not been sitting in that hallway at the right moment. Garrett leaned back against the edge of his desk and folded his arms, studying the little girl who was half hiding behind her mother now. "Lily," he said gently, "what you did was very brave. Most adults wouldn't have said anything." She blinked up at him, confused by the idea of bravery. "But I just told the truth." Garrett felt something in his chest shift. Honesty sounded so simple when spoken by a child, yet in his world, a world of negotiations, hidden motives, and ambitious men, truth was expensive, rare, and often unwanted. He had built a company on strategy and calculated choices, not on raw sincerity. And yet it was sincerity that had saved him today. Sarah looked at him with an expression that mixed gratitude with fear. "Mr. Milton. I hope you know she didn't go looking for trouble. She only said something because she thought it was the right thing to do." "I know she did," Garrett replied. "And she was right." Sarah exhaled shakily, relief flooding her features. She had lived her entire life expecting powerful people to dismiss her or, worse, punish her for things beyond her control. The fact that her daughter's honesty was being valued rather than condemned was almost too much to process. Garrett walked to his desk again, took the red folder the men had tampered with, and held it up. "This contract," he said, "could have destroyed 3 years of negotiations. It's not just paper, it's thousands of jobs, international partnerships, the stability of every employee in this building, your mother included." Lily gasped softly, as if processing the enormity of what was inside those unassuming sheets of paper. "So," she whispered, "I helped people." Garrett gave a quiet, warm nod. "You helped everyone." Lily's face lit up for the first time, but only a little, as though she was afraid the smile wasn't allowed to stay. A knock sounded at the door. The head of security returned, his expression grave. "Sir, Marcus and Dylan have been detained. They're being questioned now. Legal wants to know if we should alert law enforcement." Garrett didn't hesitate. "Yes. This goes beyond internal misconduct." As the officer left, Garrett turned back to Sarah. She stood stiff and unsure, as though she expected this moment to turn against her at any second. "Ms. Harper," he said, "I want you to know that your daughter didn't just witness wrongdoing, she prevented a corporate crime. I intend to make sure that is recognized." Sarah's breath caught. She looked down at Lily, whose fingers clutched her hand tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what would have happened if." Garrett raised a hand gently, stopping her. "Nothing good," he said honestly. "And you shouldn't have to think about the what if. She did the right thing." Then he knelt in front of Lily again, speaking softly but firmly. "If you had stayed quiet, those men would have gotten away with something terrible. But you didn't. You spoke up, even though it was scary. That makes you very strong." Lily looked at him with wide eyes. "Really strong?" "Stronger than most adults I know," he said, and meant every word. The little girl pressed her face into her mother's side again, not out of fear this time, but out of the overwhelming realization that she had done something meaningful. Sarah stroked her hair gently, her own eyes glistening. For a long moment the room was quiet, filled not with fear or tension but with something softer, the strange, unexpected bond forming between a billionaire and the tiny girl who had saved his company without even fully understanding how. Garrett straightened and looked at the two of them. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar settling into him, humility, gratitude, and a dawning awareness that maybe the universe had chosen the smallest messenger possible to send him a warning he desperately needed. And as he stood there, watching Lily cling to her mother with quiet pride, Garrett realized that this was only the beginning. Garrett called an emergency meeting with his executive team the moment the security officers escorted Marcus and Dylan away for questioning. The top-floor conference room, usually reserved for carefully curated presentations and calm corporate strategy, felt different now, tense, electric, uncertain. The long glass walls overlooked the glittering city below, but today even the skyline seemed to press inward, reminding him that the higher one stood, the farther there was to fall. As the executives filed in, murmuring among themselves, Garrett remained silent at the head of the table, his arms crossed and his gaze fixed on the red-striped folder lying in front of him. The very sight of it made his jaw tighten. That folder, which held the culmination of 3 years of negotiations, had been tampered with right outside his office door while his company trusted protocols that clearly weren't strong enough. When everyone was seated, he finally spoke, his voice steady but edged with steel. He explained the attempted sabotage while maintaining discretion regarding Lily's involvement, knowing both that secrecy was essential and that a 5-year-old didn't need to be dragged into the political jaws of corporate scandal. The executives listened in stunned silence, their earlier murmurs evaporating into a heavy stillness. "Someone inside our walls," Garrett said, tapping the folder lightly, "believed they could alter this contract and walk away without consequence. And they nearly succeeded." A ripple of outrage passed through the room, not loud, but visible in the stiffening of shoulders and the shifting of eyes. His CFO leaned forward, shock evident on his face. "This would have changed everything," he said. "The terms inside that forged contract would have transferred control of the merger to an offshore entity. We would have taken on enormous liabilities without ever realizing it." "And they counted on me signing it," Garrett replied. "Without question. Without suspicion." His legal advisor cleared her throat and asked carefully, "Do we know the motive?" "Not yet," Garrett said. "Law enforcement is questioning them. But whatever the motive is, the fact remains, they believed this company was blind." Silence stretched again. Meanwhile, in the hallway just outside the conference room, Sarah held Lily's hand tightly. The little girl stood quietly, listening through the crack of the door as the deep voices echoed. She didn't understand the details, but she understood enough to feel frightened that she had caused a storm too big for someone her size. Sarah knelt beside her, brushing her curls behind her ear, whispering, "You did nothing wrong. You did something brave, sweetheart." Lily nodded, though her eyes remained fixed on the door, her small face pale with worry. She wasn't used to adults speaking in such firm, intense tones, especially not ones who seemed to control entire worlds with the sound of their voices. Inside the room, the tone of the meeting shifted as Garrett transitioned from exposing the problem to outlining the response. He spoke about strengthening security protocols, creating stricter document access logs, and performing a full audit of the financial department. The executives took notes vigorously, their movements brisk and anxious. They had always seen Garrett as composed, analytical, and calm, a man who approached chaos with cool detachment. But today he was something different, fierce, protective, and deeply, personally invested. As the meeting progressed, someone finally asked what everyone had been thinking but was too cautious to say. "How did you even catch this so quickly? Who alerted you?" Garrett paused. For a moment something soft flickered in his eyes, something the executives weren't accustomed to seeing. He glanced toward the door almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging the small presence on the other side. "An eyewitness," he said simply. "Someone who saw what adults overlooked. Someone who chose to speak up." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The executives exchanged puzzled glances, but none dared question him further. When the meeting finally adjourned, Garrett stepped out into the hallway and found Sarah and Lily waiting just where he expected them. Lily stood straight, but her fingers clutched her mother's hand as though letting go might cause the world to tilt. When she saw Garrett approach, she didn't smile, she only looked up at him as if silently asking whether everything was falling apart because of what she said. Garrett crouched down, his suit tightening across his shoulders as he lowered himself to her height. "Hey," he said gently, "you don't have to be afraid. You didn't do anything wrong." Lily swallowed. You looked angry in there. He blinked, surprised. I wasn't angry at you, he said. I was angry at the grown men who tried to hurt this company. But I told, Lily murmured, her voice shrinking as though she feared she had been disloyal. Telling the truth isn't tattling, Garrett said firmly. It's courage. She stared at him, processing his words. Slowly, as though unsure whether she was allowed, Lily placed her tiny hand in his. He felt her fingers tremble, and something inside him shifted with quiet intensity, the protective instinct he'd forgotten he was capable of. Sarah watched the exchange with watery eyes. No one had ever spoken to her daughter with that kind of respect. No one had ever looked at Lily as though she mattered in a place filled with power, wealth, and unbreakable egos. Garrett stood again and faced Sarah. I want you both to stay here until Marcus and Dylan are formally charged. I won't have either of you walking into a situation where they might try to intimidate you. Sarah nodded, though she couldn't hide the shock on her face. Thank you, Mr. Milton. Truly. He shook his head. It's I who should be thanking her. He glanced at Lily again. She saw what no one else did. And told me when it mattered most. The weight of his words settled gently over the small girl, who straightened just a little, her blue eyes brightening with something fragile yet powerful, pride. As Garrett walked away to handle the aftermath of the sabotage, Lily tugged on her mother's sleeve. He wasn't mad, she whispered. He was proud. And in that moment Sarah understood something with absolute clarity. This day would change the course of their lives. Not because they were suddenly close to power. But because her daughter had been seen, truly seen, by a man who rarely looked at anyone outside his own world. And she sensed, without knowing how, that this was only the beginning of something neither of them could yet imagine. Garrett returned to his office after the meeting, but for the first time in years the polished glass walls and immaculate order of the room felt unsettling. He had built this space to be untouchable, a fortress of logic and power where he could control outcomes with strategy and signatures. Yet all it took to shake that illusion was a 5-year-old girl noticing what a dozen trained adults had missed. He loosened his tie, an unusual gesture for him, and sat behind his desk without touching the pile of documents waiting for his approval. Instead, he found himself replaying the moment Lily had spoken up, her small voice carrying a truth that cut through the noise of corporate deceit. He realized how rarely he slowed down enough to listen, how much of his life was spent assuming he saw everything because he stood at the top. The unsettling truth was that he had stopped seeing entirely. Meanwhile, Sarah sat with Lily on a bench in the waiting area outside his office. The building felt larger than usual, as though every hallway and corner watched them, but for the first time she sensed that she wasn't invisible. Other employees passed by, some whispering about security dragging out 2 financial analysts in handcuffs, others glancing curiously at the small girl in the red dress. Sarah kept a protective arm around her daughter's shoulders, torn between pride and fear. She knew how corporate worlds worked, she had spent years scrubbing their floors, hearing rumors and cautionary tales whispered among cleaning staff. People who caused disruptions, even unintentionally, were rarely remembered kindly. The fact that Garrett Milton himself had reassured her meant something, though she didn't yet know what. After nearly an hour of pacing around his office, Garrett asked his assistant to send Sarah and Lily in. As they stepped through the door, Lily hovered just behind her mother, uncertain if she was welcome. Garrett noticed immediately and motioned them toward the seating area near the window rather than the stiff chairs in front of his desk. He wanted them comfortable, though he wasn't sure how to achieve that with a child who still seemed half convinced she had ruined his day. Sarah sat first, and Lily climbed onto the couch beside her, tucking her legs under herself in a way that made her look even smaller. Garrett took the seat across from them, not as a CEO addressing subordinates but as a man trying to undo the distance he had unknowingly created. I know this has been a frightening day, he began, choosing his words carefully. But I want both of you to understand something, without Lily, things could have ended in disaster. This company owes her more than a simple thank you. Sarah stared at him, unsure how to respond. She just did what I taught her, she said quietly. To speak up when something is wrong. And that lesson protected thousands of people today, Garrett replied. Including you. Lily looked up at him with wide blue eyes, searching his face for confirmation. Really? She whispered, as if still doubting she could have prevented something so big. Garrett nodded, leaning forward. Really? You told the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet, and that's something even grown-ups struggle with. Lily mulled over his words, and a small, shy smile crept onto her face. Garrett felt an unexpected warmth rise in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. There was something powerful about witnessing innocence being met with respect rather than dismissal. He wondered how many children like her existed in the world, observant, brave, capable of seeing past adult blind spots, and how often their voices were overlooked. Then he turned to Sarah, his expression shifting into something earnest, almost regretful. Ms. Harper, I owe you an apology, he said. You've worked here for years, and I can't remember a single time I stopped to ask how you were managing or whether you felt supported in this job. That oversight ends today. Sarah blinked, stunned. She had expected gratitude at most, not introspection from a man known for being emotionally unreachable. You don't need to apologize to me, sir, she said hesitantly. We're just background staff. We're used to not being seen. That's exactly the problem, Garrett said quietly. People shouldn't be invisible just because their roles aren't glamorous. He stood and began walking slowly around the room, trying to gather his thoughts as he spoke. What happened today happened because two men assumed no one would notice. They relied on the fact that people don't pay attention. They were wrong. But I can't help thinking about how different our culture might be if everyone felt valued enough to speak up when something looks wrong. Sarah watched him with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. She had never heard him speak like this, she wasn't sure anyone had. Garrett finally stopped pacing and faced them again. Here's what I want to do. First, I'm providing you with a permanent full-time contract, higher pay, and better hours. You shouldn't have to work nights and juggle childcare alone. Second. He looked at Lily with a softer gaze. I want to enroll Lily in the company's educational support fund, tutoring, school materials, early learning programs, whatever she needs. She deserves every opportunity we can give her. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. Tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. Mr. Milton, I don't know what to say. This is more than I ever expected. You don't need to say anything, Garrett replied softly. Just accept it. Your daughter helped us, and it's my responsibility to help you in return. Lily shifted closer to her mother, looking up at her with a hopeful smile as if silently asking whether this new world he was offering could actually be real. Sarah hugged her tightly, whispering, It's okay, sweetheart. It's good. Garrett sat back down again, this time feeling a strange sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. There's one more thing, he said. I'd like to personally show Lily the office, the safe parts of it, so she can understand what she protected today. Lily's eyes lit up with awe. You mean, like a tour? Exactly, Garrett said with a warm smile. A tour for the bravest person in the building. Sarah laughed through her tears, and Lily giggled softly, her fear finally dissolving into excitement. As they stood and prepared to leave the office, Garrett watched them walk together, mother and daughter, small but unbreakable, and he realized that this moment was shifting something profound inside him. Lily hadn't just saved a contract, she had opened his eyes to the humanity buried beneath the veneer of corporate success. And now, seeing her skipping beside her mother with newfound confidence, he knew this wasn't merely an ending to a crisis. It was the beginning of a transformation, not just for them, but for him as well. Garrett didn't sleep that night. Even after the building emptied and the city lights dimmed into a soft glow across the skyline, he remained in his office, seated near the window with the red-striped folder lying on the table beside him like a silent reminder of how narrowly disaster had been avoided. The events of the day replayed in his mind over and over, but what lingered most vividly wasn't the betrayal of two trusted employees or the near collapse of a major merger. It was the image of a 5-year-old girl staring up at him with frightened honesty, trusting him enough to tell him something no adult had dared to. He found himself wondering how many people in the company felt unseen, undervalued, or ignored. How often had he brushed past someone like Sarah without realizing he was walking past an entire life full of struggles he never once acknowledged? Those thoughts stayed with him when he finally left the office and drove home through the quiet streets, his car gliding past sleeping buildings and dimly lit sidewalks. The mansion felt colder than usual when he entered, as if its high ceilings and expensive furnishings had been stripped of the illusion of comfort. He poured himself a glass of water, but instead of drinking it, he stood still in the middle of his living room, staring at nothing in particular, realizing that power could insulate a man so thoroughly that he ceased to see the world at all. And then he thought of Lily again, small, gentle, almost invisible, yet somehow possessing the courage to speak out against grown men who expected to get away with corruption because they assumed no one would question them. The next morning he arrived at work earlier than usual, carrying with him a sense of resolution he hadn't felt in years. He asked his assistant to bring Sarah and Lily to his office before the workday officially began. Sarah arrived nervously, her posture rigid, her hands fidgeting with the sleeve of her uniform. Lily walked beside her, not hiding behind her mother this time, but still watching Garrett with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Garrett greeted them with a warmth that surprised even himself. He had always maintained a professional distance from staff, especially non-executive workers, yet now the instinct to close that distance felt natural. He gestured for them to sit, then crouched slightly so he could meet Lily's eyes the way he had the day before. "Today," he said with calm sincerity, "I want you to stay with me for a while again. Not because there's danger, but because I want you to see what you accomplished yesterday. And because I want you to feel safe here." Lily nodded slowly, her small hands folded in her lap. She was wearing the same red dress, but today it looked different, not like something worn because it was the only nice clothing she had, but like something that made her feel brave. Sarah watched the two of them with a conflicted expression. Part of her was grateful, deeply so. Another part was afraid of what attention like this might bring. "Mr. Milton," she began carefully, "I appreciate everything you're doing, but I don't want Lily to be in the way. I don't want her to be a problem." Garrett shook his head immediately. "She isn't a problem. She never was. And she's not going to be treated like one." His voice was firmer than he intended, and Sarah blinked in surprise. He softened his tone. "Yesterday showed me something important. This company needs to be a place where every person, every employee, every child who happens to be here, feels safe and valued." Lily tilted her head. "Even kids?" Garrett smiled. "Especially kids." He saw her smile back, small and hesitant but sincere. Then he led them out of his office and into the heart of the building, beginning a quiet tour. He showed Lily the large conference room where major decisions were made, explaining that the long table was where everyone sat when they wanted to solve big problems. She giggled at the giant swivel chairs and asked if she could turn in one just once. Garrett nodded, and she spun slowly, her blonde hair catching the overhead lights in a halo of gold. Next he showed her the design department, where teams worked on graphics and layouts. Lily stared in awe at the colorful screens and the stylus boards, whispering, "It looks like magic." "It is," Garrett said, watching her with a softened expression. "The kind people make." As they moved from department to department, employees looked up in surprise, seeing their usually serious CEO walking through the building with a small child holding his hand. Whispers followed them, but none of them mattered to Garrett. He felt strangely grounded, guided by the innocent perspective of someone who saw wonder where adults saw routine. They ended the tour with the viewing deck, a quiet spot with glass walls that overlooked the whole city. Lily stood pressed against the railing, her eyes wide as she absorbed the view. "It's so big," she breathed. "Can you see everything from here?" Garrett shook his head. "Not everything. That's what yesterday taught me." She turned toward him, puzzled by the weight behind his words. He continued, choosing his tone carefully. "Sometimes being grown-up makes you think you see the whole picture. But grown-ups miss things too. Important things. And sometimes it takes someone small to notice what really matters." Lily didn't fully understand, but she nodded, sensing the seriousness beneath his calm expression. Sarah, standing a few steps behind, understood all too well. She saw that Garrett wasn't simply performing gratitude, he was genuinely changed. As they returned to his office, Lily tugged on his sleeve. "Mr. Milton," she whispered. "Are you still scared about yesterday?" He paused, kneeling so he could look into her eyes. "I was scared," he admitted. "But not anymore." "Why?" she asked. He smiled gently. "Because someone brave helped me." Lily's cheeks flushed pink, and she hid her face behind her hands for a moment. Sarah laughed softly, brushing her daughter's hair. And something in Garrett warmed in a way he hadn't felt in years, the realization that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, and that even someone as powerful as he was could learn from a child. By the time the tour ended and Sarah prepared to return to her shift, the atmosphere between them felt transformed. Garrett wasn't just a distant billionaire anymore. He was a man who had been reminded of his own humanity. And Lily wasn't just the janitor's daughter. She had become the quiet voice that pulled him back from the edge of complacency. As they left his office, something inside him settled with a sense of certainty. Whatever came next, he would never forget the moment a small girl in a red dress showed him what true awareness looked like. He had been blind for too long, and now, thanks to her, he finally understood how to see again. Garrett spent the next several days navigating a maze of legal meetings, press inquiries, and internal investigations that seemed to unfold without pause. The attempted sabotage had sent ripples through the entire company, shaking confidence in systems he had always believed were airtight. Yet through every tense meeting, every interview with attorneys, and every strategy session with the board, one image kept returning to him: Lily sitting in his office chair with her feet dangling, looking around with those huge blue eyes that saw more than most adults did. He found himself thinking about her at unexpected moments, when reviewing security logs, when reading witness reports, even when signing documents late into the night. Her presence had become a quiet force in his mind, a reminder of clarity amid chaos. While the executives worked to contain the fallout, employees across the building whispered about the mysterious eyewitness who had exposed the scheme. No one suspected a child, they assumed it was an anonymous whistleblower, maybe a shy intern or someone from IT who avoided attention. There were even theories about secret audits and undercover investigators. Only a handful of people, Garrett, Sarah, and the head of security, knew the truth. Garrett intended to keep it that way, not to hide Lily's role, but to protect her from the political machinery that could swallow her whole. He wanted her courage honored privately, not exploited publicly. Meanwhile, life changed quietly for Sarah and Lily. Sarah's new contract arrived with official signatures and benefits she had never imagined receiving. She reread it 3 times before letting herself believe it was real. A raise that meant she wouldn't need 2 additional cleaning jobs. Paid time off she had never once taken in her life. Insurance. Childcare support. It was overwhelming, almost frightening, to move from survival to stability. For Lily, the biggest change was emotional rather than financial. She no longer walked into the building clutching the hem of her dress, hoping no one would notice her. She walked with small but visible confidence now. When employees passed her in the hallway, they smiled gently, unaware of the true reason behind Garrett's sudden focus on workplace trust and security. One afternoon, Garrett invited Sarah and Lily into a smaller conference room located on the top floor, a room rarely used for anything other than personal meetings. He had something important to show them. Lily entered curiously, holding her mother's hand until she saw a framed photo displayed on an easel near the window. The picture was new, taken only a few days earlier, the three of them standing together, with Garrett slightly bent to match Lily's height, Sarah smiling with shy pride, and Lily looking up at the camera with a hesitant but hopeful expression. "Why is this here?" Lily asked, her voice a mixture of wonder and confusion. Garrett stepped forward, his tone warmer than either Sarah or Lily had ever heard from him. "Because this reminds me of something I don't want to forget," he said. "It reminds me that sometimes the smallest person in the room sees what everyone else misses." Lily blinked, letting his words sink in. She traced the frame with her fingertip, marveling at the idea of her face hanging on the wall of a billionaire's conference room. It felt like something out of a dream, a soft-edged dream where important people listened to her. Sarah looked at Garrett with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Mr. Milton," she said softly, "you don't have to do all this. We never expected anything in return." He turned to her with a seriousness that softened the moment. "I know you didn't expect anything. That's exactly why you deserve it. You've worked here for years without complaint. And your daughter did something people twice her age wouldn't have the courage to do." Sarah lowered her eyes, overwhelmed again. She wasn't used to being spoken to as someone deserving of respect, she was used to silence, to being background, to existing in the unnoticed corners of the world. Garrett's words chipped away at those old beliefs, carving out space for dignity she never thought she'd be allowed to hold. Lily suddenly scrunched her brows thoughtfully. "Mr. Milton, were you scared when you saw the wrong papers?" Garrett smiled faintly, kneeling so he could meet her gaze. "I was," he admitted, surprising even himself with the honesty. "Not because of the mistake, but because I realized how blind I had been." "But you're not blind now," Lily said matter-of-factly, as though solving a simple puzzle. "No," he said, "I'm not. Thanks to you." She looked proud for a brief moment, then shy, shifting closer to her mother. Sarah stroked her hair gently, grateful that her daughter's courage was being recognized without being exploited. As they prepared to leave, Garrett stopped them with a quiet request. "Lily," he said, "would you visit my office sometimes? Not for anything serious, just to remind me to pay attention." Lily cocked her head, puzzled by the idea of a grown man needing reminders, but she nodded. "Okay. I can remind you." Garrett felt something warm settle in his chest at her simple agreement. It was strange how quickly she had become a grounding presence in his life, a beacon that cut through the fog of ambition and responsibility. He had built his empire on precision, intellect, and discipline, yet the clearest insight he'd received in years had come from a little girl in a red dress who believed truth should always be spoken. As Garrett watched Sarah and Lily walk toward the elevator, he had a sudden realization that startled him with its depth. This wasn't charity, nor obligation, nor a corporate gesture for morale. This was personal. Lily had not only saved his contract, she had cracked open something in him that had long been sealed, a part of him capable of empathy, humility, and connection. She had reminded him of what it meant to be human in a world that worshipped power. And in that moment, as the elevator doors closed and the small girl waved at him through the narrowing gap, Garrett felt the unfamiliar certainty that his life had already begun to change because of her, and the change wasn't finished yet. The evening sun dipped behind the skyline, casting soft amber light across the glass walls of Garrett's office as he prepared to close out one of the most intense weeks of his career. Papers were organized, contracts secured, passwords changed, systems updated. The company was safer now than it had ever been, yet he felt a strange sense of calm rather than triumph. It wasn't the safety protocols or the successful legal action against the saboteurs that grounded him. It was the quiet knowledge that an unexpected force, a 5-year-old girl who should never have carried that responsibility, had been the catalyst for everything that shifted inside him. He stood by the window for a long time, watching the city breathe below, the lights flickering on one by one like stars falling into place. Somewhere in that vast labyrinth of streets, he knew Sarah and Lily were preparing for their evening routine, probably eating dinner at their small kitchen table, perhaps sharing stories about their day. The thought made him feel something gentle and warm, something he hadn't felt in years, the sense of being connected to a world outside corporate walls. Earlier that afternoon he had invited them both to stop by his office before heading home. He wasn't entirely sure what he planned to say, he only knew that he didn't want the week to end without acknowledging how profoundly they had changed the trajectory of everything. When they arrived, Lily rushed in with the unfiltered enthusiasm only children possessed. She wore a different dress today, a simple light blue one with a small bow, and her hair was tied back with a clip that caught the sunlight as she moved. She ran straight to the table where Garrett kept a small bowl of office candies and looked up at him for permission before reaching in. He nodded, suppressing a smile at how natural it felt to have her presence brighten the room. Sarah followed, looking more relaxed than he had ever seen her, her posture lighter now that the shadow of uncertainty no longer clung to her. She carried a small paper bag, which she shyly handed to Garrett. Inside was a neatly folded homemade cookie wrapped in wax paper. Lily proudly announced that they had baked it that morning as a thank you. The gesture touched him more deeply than he expected, and he placed the cookie on his desk with the same care he gave to priceless documents. Garrett asked them to sit, though Lily immediately wandered toward the large window again, drawn by the sight of the city far below. She pressed her hands against the glass and whispered about how small the cars looked, as if they were toys sliding along invisible tracks. Garrett watched her in silence for a moment, marveling at how naturally children absorbed the world around them, how they saw beauty where adults saw nothing but routine. When he turned to Sarah, she was watching her daughter with a soft smile, her eyes glowing with the quiet pride of a mother who had weathered years of hardship without letting it harden her heart. She met Garrett's gaze and murmured, almost in disbelief, that this week had changed everything for them. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was one misstep away from losing everything. She explained with hesitant honesty that the constant fear of instability had shaped every decision she made, every shift she picked up, every sleepless night she endured. Garrett listened intently, realizing that these were struggles he had never considered because his wealth shielded him from even imagining them. He finally told her something he had been thinking about for days, that he wanted to sponsor Lily's schooling long-term, ensuring she would have access to quality education, extracurricular programs, and anything she needed to nurture the sharp mind and strong conscience she had already shown. Sarah's breath caught as she processed what he said, her eyes filling instantly with tears she tried unsuccessfully to blink away. She whispered that no one had ever offered them anything like that, not even family, and she didn't know how to accept something so generous. Garrett knelt beside her, speaking quietly so that Lily, still entranced by the glowing cityscape, wouldn't overhear the weight of the moment. He explained that his offer wasn't charity or pity, it was an investment in a child who had proven herself courageous and honest beyond her years. He said he believed the world needed more people like Lily, people who spoke up when it mattered, people who didn't yet know how to be afraid of power. And he finished by saying that if he had the means to protect that bravery, nurture it, and help it grow, then he felt it was his responsibility to do so. Sarah nodded through her tears, unable to speak, clutching his hand as though anchoring herself to a moment she was terrified might disappear. Then Lily turned away from the window and walked toward them with that earnest seriousness only children could muster. She looked up at Garrett and asked the question that had been sitting quietly in her mind ever since the chaos began, whether everything was truly safe now, whether the scary part was over. Garrett scooped her up effortlessly, something he hadn't dared to do before but now felt completely natural. He told her that the danger had passed because she had spoken up when it counted. She rested her head on his shoulder for just a moment, her small hand gripping the fabric of his sleeve as though she finally trusted that the adults had taken back control. When they left his office that evening, Lily waved at him from the elevator with the same small, bright smile she had worn in the framed photograph. As the doors closed, he realized that her smile had become something powerful for him, a reminder of the moment he stopped seeing the world from a distance and started seeing it through the eyes of someone who believed truth still mattered. That night, after the building emptied again and silence settled over the city, Garrett remained at his window for a long time, reflecting on how drastically things had shifted in such a short time. He understood now that wealth didn't grant insight, humility did. Position didn't grant perspective, listening did. And as the lights below shimmered like a promise he had never known he needed, he felt a newfound certainty settle into him. His company had been saved, but something far more important had been restored within himself, the ability to see beyond power, beyond ego, beyond numbers on a page. A 5-year-old girl had reminded him how to look for the truth, how to value vulnerability, and how to recognize courage in its smallest form. It wasn't just a crisis survived. It was a transformation. And though neither he nor the little girl who had sparked it fully understood the future it would shape, one thing was clear: their lives had become quietly, permanently intertwined in a way that would continue to echo far beyond this single extraordinary week.